Johannesburg history, the hidden origins of the city of gold. Beneath the surface of South Africa's bustling metropolis lies a tale of ambition, secrecy, and transformation. Welcome to Johannesburg, a city born not out of gradual evolution, but from a single, serendipitous moment that would alter the course of history. Located in Gauteng province, the name itself, derived from the Soweto word meaning place of gold, hints at the city's shimmering yet turbulent foundation. Johannesburg, today the industrial and financial heartbeat of South Africa, is also one of the world's youngest major cities. Its official birth year? 1886. The year gold was discovered on a highveld. But long before skyscrapers pierced its skies, this land held secrets buried deep beneath the rock. In 1853, a quiet moment unfolded on the banks of the Jukskai River. Peter Jacob Murray, a local prospector, uncovered alluvial gold. It was a modest find, easily forgotten. Nearly 3 decades would pass before destiny revealed itself again, this time to a man named George Harrison. Harrison, an Australian with little idea of what he had stumbled upon, found a rocky outcrop on a remote farm named Longlegged. Unaware of the gold-laden future he held in his hands, Harrison sold his claim for a mere £10 and vanished into obscurity. But that transaction, trivial in a moment, ignited the birth of Johannesburg. The city quickly erupted into a boomtown, consumed by the feverish lust for wealth. What was once quiet farmland became a magnet for fortune seekers, adventurers, and opportunists from around the world. Yet as Johannesburg grew, so did its divisions. The city's geography bears the scars of nearly a century of engineered separation, a design that reached its apex during apartheid. Glass towers rise beside collapsing shanties. Universities of global prestige stand in the shadow of neighborhoods trapped in poverty. It is a place of profound contradiction. Abundance and deprivation, modernity and historical wounds, all interwoven into the city's fabric. By 2011, the city's population stood at nearly 1 million, its wider municipalities swelling past 4.4 million. By 2022, that number climbed even higher, nearing 5 million souls, each a part of this enigmatic and often unsettling saga. Johannesburg is more than a city. It is a mystery wrapped in gold dust, a monument to what ambition can build and what it can destroy. The rise of a city built on gold and vice. As the dust settled from George Harrison's forgotten discovery, others proved more perceptive. By mid-1886, the silence of the Witwatersrand was shattered by the clang of picks and the murmur of thousands. A relentless wave of diggers descended upon the land, clawed the earth along a glittering 40-mile stretch. Gold fever had arrived, and it would never truly leave. The Transvaal government, now facing an uncontrollable influx of fortune seekers, acted swiftly. Vice President Christian Johannes Joubert and Deputy Surveyor General Johan Rissik were dispatched to the chaotic goldfields. Their mission: impose order and mark the birth of the city. The name they chose? Johannesburg, a tribute to themselves, and a name that would soon echo across continents. It didn't take long for the sheer magnitude of the gold reserves to reveal itself. Johannesburg exploded into the last great boomtown of the 19th century, a magnet for miners, merchants, and misfits from every corner of the globe. From the hills of California to the outback of Australia, the desperate and the daring arrived in droves. Skilled miners from Cornwall and Wales brought their tools and their trade union traditions. Broken Afrikaners, pushing their farms by debt and drought, crowded into shanty towns like Brickfields and Vredendorp. And then came the tide from across southern Africa. Black laborers arrived in mass, often grouped by tribe, speaking in tongues unfamiliar to the colonial ear. They signed brutal 6- and 9-month contracts to work in the mines, only to vanish back into rural obscurity, or stay, weaving themselves into the city's growing underbelly. They found work where they could, pulling rickshaws, washing laundry, serving homes that towered above their own. By 1896, less than a decade after it first appeared on a map, Johannesburg had reached a staggering population of 100,000. But beneath the rush of industry and progress, a darker rhythm pulsed. Born of greed, Johannesburg grew like wildfire and burned just as hot. Banks and boarding houses lined its muddy streets, flanked by more than 500 saloons. Lawlessness was not a side effect. It was a lifeblood. Crime syndicates with tendrils from New York and London quickly set up shop. The mostly male population created demand for brothels, gambling dens, and every imaginable indulgence. One journalist, visiting in 1913, didn't mince words. Ancient Nineveh and Babylon have been revived, he wrote. Johannesburg is their 20th century prototype. It is a city of unbridled squalor and unfathomable squander. This was not just a mining town. This was a city born in lust and gold and haunted by both. Johannesburg history, empire beneath the earth. Beneath the glimmering streets of Johannesburg, a cold and relentless machine was forming. Not made of gears or pistons, but of capital, ambition, and unyielding stone. The main reef, Johannesburg's golden spine, was deceptive in nature. Unlike the glittering nuggets of myth and legend, this gold came buried deep in low-grade rock, a stubborn, pebbly conglomerate that surrendered only a whisper of its treasure for every ton pulled from the earth. Miners toiled through night and dust, smashing rock, washing it with mercury and later cyanide, retorting it in furnaces, all to yield mere ounces. Yet they persisted. As the reef dipped southward, plunging deeper and deeper, eventually into the abyss of 2-mile shafts, the challenge grew steeper. Depth brought danger, cost, and darkness. South African mines would soon claim the title of the deepest in the world. But the goal they offered was never easily won. Profitability became a cruel puzzle, and the solution was as ruthless as it was inevitable: consolidation. By the mid-1890s, the scattered chaos of early prospecting was replaced by industrial order. A handful of powerful mining houses emerged, swallowing competitors and amassing vast control over the Witwatersrand goldfields. These were no ordinary enterprises. They commanded armies of laborers, moved millions in capital, and answered only to far-off financiers in Europe and the United States. At the helm stood the landlords, a tight circle of men with iron wills and diamond-hard instincts. Alfred Bite, Barney Barnado, and J.B. Robinson were not strangers to the power of buried wealth. They had cut their teeth in Kimberley's diamond fields and knew precisely what the land could yield if squeezed hard enough. And squeeze they did. Under the unified banner of the Chamber of Mines, the landlords set to work. Their mission: to forge profitability out of near-impossible geology. Production was streamlined, operations mechanized, and above all, labor costs were slashed. In their eyes, profit wasn't hidden underground. It was found in the relentless pressure placed upon the backs of men. But the ore wasn't the only thing resisting them. The Transvaal government, still clinging to its Boer Republican ideals, quickly became the landlords' greatest frustration. Officials were viewed as corrupt, inefficient, and hopelessly out of step with the demands of a modern industrial empire. Bribes flowed like underground streams. Contracts and concessions were handed out to political allies with little regard for oversight. Worse still, the Boers failed to enforce the brutal labor policies the landlords craved: discriminatory taxes, strict master-servant laws, and rigid racial control. To the mining elite, this was unacceptable. As one disgusted mining expert declared, the Boers simply lacked a vision to understand capitalism, industrialization, and progress. And so, tension brewed in the shadows, not just over gold, but over power itself. Johannesburg history, gold, empire, and the machinery of segregation. As the gold mines plunged deeper into the earth, so too did Johannesburg's fate become entwined with global ambitions. The city was no longer just a mining outpost. It had become a keystone in the imperial strategy of a crumbling empire. British officials, their eyes fixed on Johannesburg's endless seams of gold, saw in Witwatersrand not only wealth but salvation. The reserves of the Bank of England had grown dangerously thin. In an age where imperial strength was measured in gold bars and hard currency, Johannesburg's reef gleamed like a beacon, and they intended to claim it. Tensions boiled over in 1895. With quiet approval from British authorities, the mining tycoon Cecil John Rhodes backed a bold, ill-fated gambit: the Jameson Raid, an attempted coup to topple the Boer-controlled Transvaal government. It failed spectacularly, but it was only the opening move. The British soon found their pretext in the plight of the Uitlanders, mostly British expatriate miners in Johannesburg, who, under Transvaal law, were denied the right to vote. The injustice was real, but the outrage was calculated. By September 1899, London had delivered an ultimatum demanding full political rights for these white foreigners. A month later, the South African War erupted, a brutal contest of empires over dust and sovereignty. When the dust finally settled in 1902, the Transvaal and the Orange Free State were no longer Boer republics. They were colonies of the British Empire. Johannesburg, ever untouched by the front lines, was quietly absorbed into a new imperial order. British troops marched into the city in June 1900, unchallenged and unopposed. The gold mines, left curiously intact by the retreating Boers, resumed operations swiftly, and with that, the Rand lords got what they had long desired, a government that served capital first. Imperial authorities, now installed in Pretoria and Johannesburg, dismantled Boer tariffs, voided old contracts, and introduced new laws designed to enforce economic submission. Past laws and labor taxes corralled black South Africans into the mines under punishing terms. When that still wasn't enough, the government partnered with the Chamber of Mines to import over 60,000 Chinese indentured laborers, turning the city into a hub of global exploitation. By the time the Union of South Africa was inaugurated in 1910, Johannesburg's gold industry had become a well-oiled imperial machine, efficient, profitable, and built on coerced labor. But gold wasn't the only thing being engineered. As the 20th century dawned, a new ideology took hold: segregation, dressed in the sterile language of order and sanitation. In 1904, a supposed outbreak of plague became the excuse to forcibly remove black residents from the city center to the barren outskirts of Klipspruit, a former sewage farm, 10 miles from town. It would not be the last removal. Inspired by eugenics, influenced by European urban planning, and driven by white anxieties over race and space, Johannesburg's leaders embraced a dark vision: a city surgically divided by color. This ideology took legal form in the 1923 Natives, Urban Areas Act, which branded all urban black South Africans as temporary sojourners, tolerated only if they served white needs. The act provided a framework and a justification for pushing thousands out of informal housing into segregated townships like Alexandra, Western Areas, and later Orlando East, the first brick in a vast, sprawling development that would one day be called Soweto. Police raid became routine, targeting not only the idle or disorderly, but anyone whose existence could not be economically justified. Liquor raids, past checks, midnight arrests, the machinery of segregation whirred to life. What had begun as a city of gold was now becoming a blueprint for racial domination. Johannesburg history, uprising in the shadow of gold. If Johannesburg was forged by capital, it was tempered by resistance. And while the city's skyline grew, so too did the voices rising beneath it, voices that refused to be silenced, even when met with bayonets. The early 20th century brought no peace to black South Africans. Despite endless promises of equality under British rule, the post-war years revealed only betrayal. In response, black residents of Johannesburg organized, petitioned, and protested. They appealed to what they believed was a British tradition, one rooted in justice and fairness, in equality before the law. But their appeals fell on deaf ears. As World War I tightened its grip on global markets, inflation soared and wages stagnated. African workers, squeezed between exploitation and hunger, struck back. Railway workers, sanitation workers, municipal staff, all took to the streets of Johannesburg in open defiance. The spark soon ignited a flame. The Transvaal Native Congress, a local affiliate of what would become the African National Congress, ANC, launched a bold anti-pass campaign, directly challenging the laws that reduced black lives to paperwork and permits. Tensions boiled over. Violent clashes with police became inevitable. Then, in 1920, the mines themselves convulsed. 70,000 black mine workers, the invisible engine of Johannesburg's wealth, laid down their tools and demanded dignity. In response, the state sent the military. With bayonets fixed, soldiers marched the men back underground at gunpoint. Profit, once again, was preserved by force. But resistance wasn't confined to the oppressed. The most dangerous threat to South Africa's early political order came not from the mine's depths, but from within the privileged ranks of Johannesburg's white workers. These men, shielded by the Job Color Bar of the 1911 Mines and Works Act, held a monopoly on skilled labor and wages 5 to 10 times those of their black counterparts. To mine owners, this arrangement was expensive and expendable. In 1907, 1913, and again in 1922, efforts to cut costs by replacing white workers with cheaper black labor ignited full-blown resistance. The final confrontation became legend, the Rand Revolt. What began as a strike escalated into a full-scale armed insurrection. White workers, chanting "Workers of the world unite for a white South Africa," seized control of Johannesburg. For a brief and chaotic moment, the city fell under their command. It ended in fire and blood. 20,000 troops, artillery, and aerial bombardments descended on the city. The uprising was crushed, but not before more than 200 people were killed, including 30 black civilians murdered by strikers. Johannesburg, always a city of extremes, had once again become a battlefield. Then came the transformation. The 1930s and 1940s reshaped Johannesburg not through violence, but through migration and industry. Driven by the collapse of rural reserves and pulled by the promise of jobs, a wave of black South Africans flooded into the city. Johannesburg's gold was no longer its only treasure. It was now the epicenter of South Africa's manufacturing boom. Following the country's departure from the gold standard in 1933, factories mushroomed. Industries surged ahead of both agriculture and mining in economic power. The city and its industrial satellites, Benoni, Boksburg, Germiston, began to hum with new energy. By the early 1940s, more blacks were working in factories than in the mines. But there was something new, something that rattled the old order. These workers weren't temporary. They weren't passing through. They were building lives, permanently urbanized, settled with wives, children, and entire communities. For a system built on control, on division, and on the myth of temporary labor, this permanence was a threat more dangerous than any strike. Johannesburg, once a wild mining town, was becoming something far more complex and far more volatile. Johannesburg history, war, resistance, and the making of Mandela. As the world descended once more into war, Johannesburg stood at a crossroads, not of armies, but of ideologies. World War II tore through Europe and the Pacific, but on the Witwatersrand, the conflict took a different shape. With white South African workers conscripted to distant battlefields, factories across Johannesburg boomed, and they needed labor. Desperately, the government of Prime Minister Jan Smuts, caught between the dogma of segregation and the realities of war-driven industry, made a fateful choice. It suspended influx control. The floodgates opened. Black South Africans poured into the city in numbers never seen before. In just a few years, Johannesburg's black population doubled, soaring past 400,000. But there were no homes waiting for them, no infrastructure, no welcome. With formal housing construction frozen by war, new arrivals were crammed into the already overwhelmed townships or forced to carve out their own space in informal squatter camps, raised overnight wherever open land remained. These makeshift settlements were teeming, unplanned, and vulnerable, ripe for disease, crime, and despair. But something else began to grow in the shadows of hardship: defiance. In Alexandra, one of the city's oldest black townships, bus boycotts erupted, tactical, organized, and unrelenting. Across the camps, squatter movements challenged the state directly, claiming space not as vagrants but as citizens. Amid the chaos, a fire of political awakening caught hold. From that fire emerged a new kind of resistance, militant, youthful, and unafraid. It was called the African National Congress Youth League. Among its founders was a young apprentice attorney living in Johannesburg. His name, Nelson Mandela. While leaders met in backrooms, workers acted in the mines. In 1946, the tremors turned to a quake. Black mine workers staged a massive strike, demanding better wages and safer conditions. It was met, predictably, with violence, but the line had been crossed. A new era was taking shape. Johannesburg, once built on gold and conquest, had become the crucible of revolution, a city not only of shadowed past, but futures being forged beneath the weight of history. The story of Johannesburg does not end here. In truth, it never ends, it transforms. If you found this journey through Johannesburg history powerful, mysterious, or even unsettling, subscribe to History Love for more stories that go beyond the textbooks. Like, share, and join us as we uncover the hidden truths behind the cities, empires, and movements that shaped our world. History isn't just what happened. It's what we remember. Keep remembering with us.